The subtle shift started months ago. A new perfume, a dress that suddenly seemed too alluring for our quiet dinners, a phone that was never more than an arm's length away. It was like watching a stranger inhabit my wife, Amy's, skin. I tried talking to her, of course. "Is everything okay?" I'd ask, only to be met with an eye roll and a dismissive, "Of course, why wouldn't it be?" The secret admirer started as a joke. "Oh, someone's sending me flowers at work," she'd say with a coy smile, batting her eyelashes. "Isn't that funny?" And I, foolish me, I'd laugh along. She'd go on to describe the notes, the anonymous gifts, always giggling like a schoolgirl, and I'd brush aside the unease that began to fester in my gut. I thought maybe, just maybe, she was trying to reignite some spark between us. I tried harder to be romantic, planned date nights, even bought a ridiculous bouquet of red roses. She'd thank me politely, but her eyes still held that faraway gleam. The laughing though, that really got to me. She'd talk about this admirer with a sort of breathless delight, a light in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't playful anymore. It was conspiratorial. It made me feel like I was on the outside looking in, like I was some kind of joke. The nights became unbearable. She'd come to bed late, smelling faintly of something musky and unfamiliar, her body always turned away from me. I'd lie awake, the silence in our bedroom as deafening as a gunshot, and I started to dread going home. I knew something was deeply wrong. I told myself I was being paranoid, but my gut had become a twisted knot of anxiety. Finally, desperate for answers, I decided to install a hidden camera in our bedroom. It was a violation of trust, I knew, but I had nowhere else to turn. The first few nights were uneventful. Just Amy sleeping, or working late on her computer, or, more often than not, just on her phone. The footage felt like proof of my own paranoia, proof that I was just being insecure. I almost deleted it, almost convinced myself that I'd let my fear get the better of me. Then came Thursday. I watched the video, my blood turning to ice. She wasn't alone. He was there, his face blurry in the low light, but his presence was unmistakable. And the laughter, that sickening, giddy laughter, it was the same as when she talked about her secret admirer. They were in my bed, using my sheets, sharing a cruel joke at my expense. The casual way they touched, the whispered words that I couldn't quite make out, it was all a horrifying parody of intimacy. I felt sick to my stomach, betrayed and violated in the deepest way possible. But underneath the pain, something else was rising, a cold, simmering rage. I didn't sleep that night. I replayed the video over and over, every detail burned into my brain. I watched her laugh, watched him touch her. And with every replay, my resolve hardened. They weren't just going to get away with this. The next day, I acted like nothing was wrong. I made coffee, kissed Amy goodbye as she left for work, and even managed a weak smile. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I knew I had to wait for the right moment, to gather my strength and my evidence. That evening, I told her I had a surprise for her. I had arranged a romantic dinner at home, something, just for us. Her eyes lit up, she asked me if I had gotten more flowers. I smiled back, a little too tightly. When she returned home, she was in a good mood, she put on the dress I hated and seemed particularly excited. It was repulsive to watch. I led her into the living room, where I had a laptop set up on the coffee table. "I thought we could watch a movie," I said, my voice eerily calm. I opened the laptop, and the video began to play. She didn't say a word at first. Her eyes darted from the screen to me, her face a mask of disbelief. Her mouth gaped open, as if trying to form the words, but nothing came out. She reached out, as if to grab my arm, and I recoiled, disgust curling in my chest. The sound of her laughter filled the room, mocking, cruel, a stark contrast to the silence she had now fallen into. I watched as the color drained from her face, her breathing growing shallow. Her legs buckled beneath her. She fell to the floor, a crumpled mess, and the only sound in the room was the repetitive footage of her betrayal. I knelt beside her, and my voice, low and controlled, cut through the silence. "Who is he, Amy?" She couldn't meet my gaze. She just started to sob, her body shaking. I pressed her harder. "Who is he?" I repeated. Finally, in a strangled voice, she whispered his name, Ryan. The rage that had been simmering finally came to a boil. It was a white-hot fury that burned through me, leaving me trembling. I knew I couldn't stay in the same room with her any longer. Stay here, I said, my voice barely a growl. Don't move. I grabbed my keys and stormed out of the house, the image of them together, her laughing, burned into my mind. I had to find him. I had to make him understand the pain he'd caused. I knew where he worked, she had mentioned it casually during one of her secret admirer tales. It was a bar downtown, a place she frequented after work, a place they had probably met. The drive felt like an eternity, the streets a blur of lights and shadows. I parked the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I walked into the bar, the music a dull throb in my ears. It took me a moment to spot him. He was behind the bar, laughing with a group of patrons, his face animated, full of life. The sight of him, so carefree, so utterly oblivious to the wreckage he'd created, made my blood boil. I walked right up to him, ignoring the confused looks from the other bartenders. "Ryan," I said, my voice low and dangerous. He turned, his smile fading as he met my gaze. He looked at me for a moment, a flicker of recognition, then realization, then fear, flashed across his eyes. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice wavering. "You know my wife," I replied, my hand balling into a fist. His face paled, his eyes darting around, looking for a way to escape. He stammered, I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, you know exactly what I'm talking about," I hissed, leaning across the bar. I grabbed his collar, pulling him toward me. "You think it's funny, don't you? Sleeping with my wife, making a fool out of me." His eyes widened in terror as he saw the rage in mine. He tried to wriggle free, but I held him fast. "Look," he said, his voice shaking, "it's not what you think." I didn't let him finish. My fist connected with his jaw, the force of the blows sending him staggering back. He stumbled against the bar, sending a few glasses crashing to the floor. The music seemed to stop. All eyes were on us. Patrons gasped, some began to back away, and the other bartenders stared in stunned silence. Ryan clutched his jaw, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and fear. "You're a coward," I snarled, my voice filled with disgust. "You prey on married women, you sneak around, and you think it's all just some kind of game." He didn't answer. He was too busy trying to regain his balance, his hands still pressed against his throbbing jaw. I grabbed him again, dragging him from behind the bar and into the narrow space between the bar and the wall. The fear in his eyes fueled my rage. I didn't hold back. I unleashed a flurry of punches, each blow landing with a sickening thud. He tried to cover his face, but I was relentless, my anger driving me forward. He crumpled to the floor, a whimpering mess, his hands raised in feeble defense. "This isn't even for me," I said, my voice tight with barely contained fury. "This is for the pain you caused my wife. For her betrayal." I could have kept going, I could have kept hitting him until he was unrecognizable, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the look of pure terror in his eyes, maybe it was the realization of what I was becoming, but the rage began to recede, leaving behind a cold emptiness. I stood over him, panting, my knuckles aching, the echoes of my violence still ringing in the air. He lay there, a pathetic figure, his clothes rumpled, his face bruised and swollen. He looked broken, defeated, utterly devoid of the arrogance he had possessed just moments before. I turned and walked out of the bar, leaving him to pick up the pieces of his shattered pride. The world outside felt different, the air somehow fresher. The violence had purged some of the rage, but the pain, the deep, gnawing pain of betrayal, still lingered. I went home to Amy. I found her still on the floor, where I had left her. She was sobbing, her body racked with tremors, the image of our shattered life, playing out over and over again on the laptop screen. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading, begging for forgiveness. "Who is he, Amy?" I asked her again, not because I needed the answer but because I needed to hear her say it, to confront the reality of what she'd done. She whispered his name again, her voice barely audible. I turned the laptop off, and the room became dark, the only sound was the sound of her crying. "Get out," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion. She looked at me, confusion in her eyes. "What?" she asked, "where would I go?" "I don't care," I said, my voice ice cold. "Just get out of my house, out of my life. I don't want to see you ever again." She started to cry harder, trying to take my hand, pleading with me, but I did not budge. I stood there, watching as she gathered her things, her movements jerky, panicked. I didn't help her. I didn't say a word. As she walked out the door, I closed it behind her, the sound echoing through the now empty house. I was alone, truly alone, but I was free. The next few days were a blur of activity. I changed the locks, contacted a lawyer, and started the long process of untangling our lives. The support from friends and family was overwhelming, their messages a lifeline in the sea of grief and anger. I was no longer the man who had been oblivious to his wife's betrayal, I was now someone they rallied around. The rumors about Ryan spread quickly. His actions had consequences, his reputation was ruined, and his job was gone. He was a pariah, his name whispered with disgust. He had lost everything. His world, as I had heard from a mutual acquaintance, had truly crashed down around him. I thought I would feel some sort of victory, some kind of satisfaction at his downfall, but all I felt was a strange emptiness. The revenge was satisfying, yes, but it didn't fill the void that had been left behind. I had won, but at what cost? The pain of Amy's betrayal still lingered, a constant reminder of the trust I had so willingly given and so carelessly broken. I knew it would take time to heal, to rebuild, and to learn to trust again, but for now, I was content knowing that I had stood up for myself, that I had refused to be a victim. I had faced the darkness, and in doing so, I had found a flicker of light. I was moving on. I was moving forward, alone, but finally, free.